Okay, back again. We had a little battery issue with the recorder. And I want you to know my videos will not typically be this long. We had a little issue around the, introducing the class and so forth. And I will try and be more succinct in the future. All right, back to where we left off, which is those two sides of the phonological processing or core deficit related to reading disability. Okay, and we mentioned that rapid naming issue, which inhibits the development of reading fluency, of automatic word recognition. Okay, now, if you ask me from my reading of research, basically the phonemic awareness issue is probably the most prevalent. Most kids, and you'll see this for instance in what we read today, or what we read in this module, about 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 kids continue to struggle with word recognition on into the upper elementary and middle school if they are struggling with reading. Rapid naming, a little less common, but it is certainly out there and it does appear in the research. Now, as you might guess, the kids who struggle the most and who are the toughest to respond to actually are referred to as double deficit kids. They have both issues with phonological processing and with rapid naming, both with learning to decode words and automatizing them. So that's another possibility. Now, the idea of the core deficit is that things start here. That's not to say that these same kids, as they move along, won't have trouble with limitations in vocabulary knowledge, background knowledge, making inferences based on text, and other comprehension problems. But those may be a little more of consequences of these early core deficits than they may be more environmental issues than they are actually the core deficit underlying the reading disability. So that's the core deficit perspective on reading difficulties. Yes, those kids struggle with a lot of aspects of the reading process, but we can usually trace the origin of that struggle down to these couple of core deficits. All right, that leads us perfectly into the last point, which is called the Matthew effect. Okay, my students had that. We talked a little bit about this in 2140. Boy, now those chickens really come home to roost. This is where the Matthew effect was the term was coined in dealing with children with reading difficulties. The Matthew effect was used by a researcher named Stanovich, who was studying reading disability, because it perfectly captures the experience of kids with those difficulties. It refers to a parable from the Bible where the point is that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Nothing more appropriately summarizes the experience of kids learning to read than that. A strong early performer, no phonological processing issues, good early instruction, learns to read fairly easily, reads more and more as they progress. More reading leads to greater fluency, greater automaticity, leads to greater background knowledge, increases their vocabulary, and that spiral just goes up and up. On the other hand, a kid who struggles in the beginning, whether due to a core biological deficit, environmental issues that aren't sort of met with really intensive instruction, well, they struggle in the beginning with decoding. Consequently, they read less. They get less reading practice, so they have less of an opportunity to automatize word recognition and develop reading fluency. So they read more slowly. They read less. It makes less sense to them. So they're not motivated to read. Consequently, they develop less background knowledge, which would be useful in making those more advanced texts understandable. They encounter fewer unfamiliar vocabulary words, fewer academic vocabulary words, and so their vocabulary growth is stunted, and so the poor get poorer. So the Matthew effect, a perfect sort of analogy for what happens so many cases in terms of proficient versus struggling readers. And of course, our goal as educators, our goal in the early grades, throughout elementary grades, and in this class is to learn how to combat the Matthew effect, to intervene early and strongly so that the poor don't get poor, that they get put back on a trajectory that parallels the kids who are typical or very advanced readers. All right, that's it for my first video. Hope this has been helpful. Remember these 5 points. You may need to look at this again. You may indeed see this kind of information again when it comes to our quiz, which will cover both the reading and what I share with you. All right, have a great week with the reading, and I'll see you on the discussion boards very shortly.